Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the orbital station, watching something that should have been impossible. Below her, massive crystalline dragons moved through space without any protection, their scales shimmering with an inner light that made the stars look dim. These creatures were each the size of a small moon, their wings stretching across distances that would take human ships hours to cross. But that wasn't the impossible part. Every species in the galaxy knew dragons could survive in the vacuum of space. What made Sarah's breath catch in her throat was where they were going. The dragons were heading straight for the barrier zone. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his station, voice tight with worry. "The dragon formation is maintaining course for Sector 7 Alpha. Should we send another warning?" Sarah almost laughed. Warning dragons? As if they cared about human concerns. As if they ever listened to anyone. The barrier zone was humanity's greatest shame and greatest necessity rolled into one. 30 years ago, when humans first encountered the dragons, things had gone wrong fast. Not because the dragons were evil or hostile. They simply didn't care about the small, fragile creatures that lived on planets and built ships. To them, humans were like insects, not worth noticing, not worth avoiding, certainly not worth changing their behavior for. When a dragon decided to land on a human colony world, it landed. If there was a city in the way, well, that was the city's problem. When dragons migrated through a solar system, their massive forms created gravitational disturbances that could pull planets from their orbits. They never meant to destroy human worlds. They just didn't care enough to avoid it. So humanity had done something desperate. They had built the barrier zone, a massive network of energy fields and defensive satellites that surrounded Earth and 12 of humanity's most important colonies. It was powered by the combined output of 3 small stars, and it was the most expensive project in human history. The barriers worked, mostly. Dragons couldn't be bothered to break through them. It wasn't that they couldn't. They simply found the resistance annoying and went somewhere else instead, like children who would rather walk around a fence than climb over it. But the barriers came with a cost. They cut humanity off from most of the galaxy. Trade with other species slowed to a crawl. Exploration stopped. Humanity was safe, but trapped. "No more warnings," Sarah told Rodriguez. "They won't listen anyway." She watched the dragons approach the barrier. The lead dragon was massive, even by dragon standards, its scales a deep blue that reminded Sarah of Earth's oceans before the pollution. Its wings moved in slow, graceful sweeps that somehow propelled it faster than any human ship could travel. The dragon reached the barrier and stopped. Sarah leaned forward, pressing her face against the reinforced viewing port. The dragon was hovering just outside the energy field, its great head turned toward the barrier as if it was looking for something. "Rodriguez, are you seeing this?" "Yes, ma'am. The lead dragon has stopped just outside the barrier perimeter. The others are forming a—" "Wait." Rodriguez paused, checking his instruments. "Ma'am, they're forming a circle. The dragons are making a circle around the barrier entrance." This was new. In 30 years of barrier operation, dragons had never lingered at the perimeter. They hit the resistance, got annoyed, and left. They didn't stop. They definitely didn't wait. "Sir," Communications Officer Williams called out, his voice high with excitement. "I'm receiving a transmission request. It's coming from inside the barrier." "From where inside the barrier?" Sarah demanded. "Beacon Station 7, ma'am. Someone wants to transmit to the dragons." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Beacon Station 7 was supposed to be automated. It was just a maintenance platform for the barrier generators, with maybe 3 or 4 technicians aboard at any given time. No one there had the authority to make contact with dragons. "Who's requesting transmission permission?" Williams worked at his console for a moment. "The request is coming from someone named Marcus Webb, ma'am. He's listed as a Level 3 maintenance engineer." Sarah had never heard of any human who could talk to dragons. Most humans couldn't even get a dragon's attention, let alone have a conversation with one. But as she watched, the great blue dragon outside turned its head toward Beacon Station 7, as if it could sense the transmission request from millions of kilometers away. "Grant the transmission," Sarah ordered. A voice filled the command center. It was calm, steady, with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't place. "Good morning, Kelthera. I see you brought friends today." The dragon's response came not as sound, but as a feeling that somehow reached every human in the command center. It was like music made of starlight, beautiful and alien and somehow sad. "Marcus, who speaks truth. We have brought the young ones to see. They do not understand why we wait." Sarah grabbed the communications console. "This is Commander Chen of Orbital Defense Command. Identify yourself, Marcus Webb." A pause, then Marcus Webb's voice again, sounding amused. "Hello, Commander. I'm exactly what my file says I am. A maintenance engineer. I fix broken things." "Maintenance engineers don't have conversations with dragons." "No, ma'am, they usually don't. But Kelthera and I have been talking for about 3 years now. Ever since I figured out how to modulate the barrier transmission array to frequencies dragons can hear." Sarah stared at the display, showing the dragons arranged in their perfect circle outside the barrier. "Mr. Webb, you are ordered to report to Orbital Command immediately for debriefing." "Can't do that right now, Commander. Kelthera has brought some young dragons to meet me, and it would be rude to leave. Dragon youngsters don't get many chances to talk to humans. Most of us are too scared or too angry to have a real conversation." The blue dragon moved closer to the barrier, and Sarah could swear it was looking directly at Beacon Station 7, despite the vast distance. "The young ones ask why you remain behind the barriers." The dragon's voice reached them again. "They ask why your kind chooses small spaces when the universe is vast." "Tell them," Marcus Webb's voice said, "that humans build barriers not because we're afraid of the dragons, but because we're afraid of being forgotten." Sarah frowned. That didn't make sense. Humans built barriers to keep dragons out, to protect their worlds and their people. But the young dragons around Kelthera seemed to understand something Sarah didn't. They moved in closer, their massive forms creating a tighter circle around the barrier entrance. "Explain," Kelthera requested. "Dragons are magnificent," Marcus said, and Sarah could hear the genuine admiration in his voice. "You're old and wise and powerful. You've seen civilizations rise and fall, but humans, we're short-lived. We're fragile. We know that in the grand sweep of time, we'll barely register as a footnote. So we build barriers not to keep you out, but to make sure that when you pass by, you notice we were here." The feeling that came from the dragons was different this time. Not sad, but thoughtful, contemplative. "You believe we would forget your kind exists? Kelthera, you once told me that your people have watched 1,000 species evolve and disappear. How many of their names do you remember?" A long pause. Then, "Few." "Humans don't want to be forgotten. We want to matter. We want our choices and our struggles and our little victories to mean something. The barriers aren't walls, Kelthera. They're signatures. They're us saying we are here, we exist. We matter enough to change the space around us." Sarah felt something shift in her understanding. She had always thought the barriers were about protection, about keeping humanity safe from indifferent giants. But Marcus Webb was talking about them as if they were a message, a way of forcing the universe to acknowledge humanity's presence. "The young ones are curious about this perspective," Kelthera said. "They wish to know more about barrier builders, about humans who choose small spaces but dream of vast ones." "Well," Marcus said, and Sarah could hear his smile in his voice, "why don't you tell them about yesterday?" Sarah leaned forward. Yesterday? What had happened yesterday? Yesterday, Marcus, who speaks truth, repaired 17 barrier generators while riding outside his ship in the void. He worked for 14 hours without rest to restore power to a failing section. When I asked why he risked his life for machines, he said it was because 3 million humans lived behind that section, 3 million individuals he had never met, whose names he did not know, whose lives depended on barriers he could fix. The dragons moved closer to the barrier, and Sarah realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. Dragons paying attention to a human story, dragons caring about human motivations. He could have sent repair drones. He could have waited for a safer opportunity. Instead, he chose to risk his life for strangers because he said every human life is irreplaceable. He said humans do not have time to be careful with compassion. "That's just being responsible," Marcus said, sounding embarrassed. "If I can fix something that protects people, I fix it. That's the job." But Kelthera's response carried something that Sarah had never heard from a dragon before: respect. "This is why we wait. This is why we return to your barriers each day, not because we cannot pass through, because you have shown us something we had forgotten: the value of small lives lived with great purpose." Sarah sat down heavily in her command chair. Dragons came to the barriers every day, and no one in command had told her. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "pull the daily reports for the past year. I want to know every time dragons have approached the barriers." As Rodriguez worked, Sarah listened to the conversation between Marcus Webb and the ancient dragon. They talked about human engineering, about the mathematics of barrier construction, about the philosophical implications of choosing safety over exploration. But underneath it all, Sarah heard something else. She heard mutual respect between two very different forms of intelligence. She heard a maintenance engineer who saw dragons not as threats, but as beings worth talking to. And she heard dragons who had found something in humanity that made them willing to pause their eternal journeys across the cosmos. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice shaken, "dragons have been visiting the barriers every day for 3 years, every single day. The reports all list them as non-hostile flyby encounters, but they're not flying by. They're stopping, they're waiting." Sarah looked out at the circle of dragons, these ancient beings who could cross galaxies without effort, who had seen civilizations rise and fall, who were so far beyond human understanding that most people thought of them as forces of nature rather than intelligent beings. And every day, they came to wait at humanity's barriers to talk to one maintenance engineer who treated them like friends rather than threats. "Commander," Williams said, "Marcus Webb is requesting permission to approach the barrier perimeter in his maintenance pod." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Leaving the safety of the barriers was against every regulation in the book. But as she watched the dragons waiting patiently outside, she realized that maybe the regulations were wrong. "Permission granted," she said. "And Mr. Webb, I think it's time Command had a longer conversation with you." "Looking forward to it, Commander. But first, I promised to show Kelthera's students how barrier harmonics work. Turns out dragons are really good at math." As Sarah watched Marcus Webb's tiny maintenance pod approach the barrier perimeter, she realized that humanity's relationship with the universe was about to change, and it was all because one human had decided to see dragons not as indifferent gods, but as beings worth talking to. The pod passed through the barrier, and for the first time in 30 years, a human willingly left the safety of the barrier zone. The dragons moved closer, their massive forms creating a protective formation around the tiny ship. And Sarah understood that she was witnessing the beginning of something that would reshape both species' understanding of what it meant to matter in an infinite universe. Marcus Webb floated in his maintenance pod, surrounded by beings that could crush his ship without noticing. The dragons had arranged themselves in a sphere around him, their massive forms blocking out the stars. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He was home. Kelthera's ancient presence filled his mind with warmth. "Show them the resonance patterns. Marcus who speaks truth. They struggle to understand how small beings create such stable energy constructs. Marcus activated his pod's external displays, projecting holographic representations of the barrier's harmonic frequencies into space. The young dragons leaned in, their scales shifting color as they processed the information. See this pattern here? Marcus pointed to a complex waveform. Humans discovered something by accident. We're terrible at large-scale energy manipulation compared to you, but we're really good at making small, precise adjustments that add up to something bigger. One of the younger dragons, its scales a bright silver that reminded Marcus of new steel, sent a questioning pulse. How do weak energy sources create strong barriers? Marcus smiled. Even dragons had to learn that strength came in different forms. Watch this, he said, adjusting his displays. A single barrier generator puts out about as much energy as a dragon uses to flick its tail. Pathetic, right? But we don't use just one. He expanded the display to show the full barrier network. Thousands of generators, each one tiny by dragon standards, but all working in perfect harmony. We use 17,000 generators in a synchronized pattern. Each one adjusts its output millions of times per second to match the others. The result isn't just addition, it's multiplication. Weak signals supporting each other become a force that even you find annoying to push through. The silver dragon's scales rippled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as surprise. This is cooperation? More than cooperation. It's precision teamwork. Every generator has to trust that the others will do their jobs perfectly. If even one falls out of sync, the whole network becomes vulnerable. Kelthara's amusement touched Marcus's mind. Tell them about the maintenance protocols. Marcus laughed. Oh, you want to hear the really crazy part? The network is so complex that it breaks down constantly. Generators burn out, harmonic frequencies drift, cosmic radiation causes interference. By all logic, the barriers should have failed years ago. The young dragons exchanged confused pulses of color. But humans don't accept logic when it gets in the way of protecting people. So we built a maintenance system that's almost as complex as the barriers themselves. Hundreds of engineers working around the clock, diagnostic systems that monitor every component, repair drones that can fix problems faster than they develop. Marcus pulled up another display showing the real-time maintenance network. Red dots appeared and disappeared across the barrier grid as problems were detected and resolved. Yesterday, while I was out here talking to Kelthara, the network automatically detected and fixed 47 different potential failure points. Most of them were so small that they would have taken weeks to become actual problems. But the system doesn't wait for problems to become serious. It fixes everything immediately. The silver dragon's colors shifted to deep blue, a shade Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. Your species maintains 17,000 machines in perfect harmony, despite constant failures across dozens of star systems. Every day, for 30 years, and not just maintains them. We're constantly improving them, making them more efficient, more reliable, better at working together. Another young dragon, this one with scales like polished copper, sent a complex harmonic that took Marcus a moment to interpret. Why do you not build fewer, stronger generators instead of many weak ones? This was the question Marcus had been hoping for. This was where the real lesson started, because that's not how humans think. We don't believe in putting all our trust in one powerful thing. We believe in building networks of support, redundancy, backup systems, multiple ways to accomplish the same goal. He paused, looking out at the dragons surrounding him. Each one was incredibly powerful individually. Each one could probably destroy the entire barrier network if it really wanted to, but they worked alone, lived alone, thought alone. Dragons are magnificent individuals. You're each like a force of nature. But humans, we're pack hunters. We're social builders. Our strength comes from working together, from making sure no one person or machine or idea is so important that everything fails if it breaks. Kelthara's presence deepened. Explain pack hunting to those who have never needed to hunt in groups, Marcus thought carefully. How do you explain human cooperation to beings who were born capable of surviving anything the universe could throw at them? On Earth, humans evolved alongside predators much stronger than us. We couldn't outrun them, couldn't outfight them individually. So we learned to work together. One human might distract the predator, while another attacked from behind. A third might prepare an escape route. We survived by making ourselves stronger as a group than any of us could be alone. The copper dragon's scales brightened. You still do this? Every day. Look at this barrier network. No single human understands all of it. The physicist who designed the harmonic resonance doesn't know how to build the generators. The engineer who builds the generators doesn't know how to write the control software. The programmer who writes the software doesn't understand the political negotiations that got 30 different human colonies to cooperate on the project. Marcus expanded his display to show personnel records. Thousands of names, each with different specializations. But together, they built something none of them could have created alone. And they maintain it together. They improve it together. They stake their lives on trusting each other to do their jobs perfectly. The young dragons were silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, the silver one sent a pulse that Marcus felt rather than heard. This is why you speak to us without fear? You trust others to maintain your safety while you risk yourself for conversation? I trust the barrier network to keep my people safe while I'm out here. I trust my equipment to keep me alive in the vacuum. I trust my colleagues to monitor the dragons and warn me if any of you develop aggressive intentions. But mostly, Marcus paused, looking directly at Kelthara's massive form. I trust that Kelthara has become my friend, and friends don't hurt each other. The feeling that came from the ancient dragon was complex. Gratitude, perhaps, recognition, and something else that Marcus was still learning to identify. In 3,000 years, no being has offered friendship to dragons. We are too powerful, too different, too dangerous to befriend. That's the other thing about humans, Marcus said. We're either too stupid or too stubborn to know when we should be afraid. Usually both. The copper dragon sent an amused harmonic. You are not afraid of us? Terrified, Marcus admitted cheerfully. You could sneeze and accidentally destroy my ship. You could decide you're bored and leave me stranded in empty space. You're so far beyond human comprehension that talking to you should be impossible. The dragon's confusion was almost tangible. But being afraid doesn't mean I can't be curious. Being small doesn't mean I can't be respectful. And being different doesn't mean we can't find common ground. Marcus adjusted his displays to show something new. Star charts, but not ordinary ones. These showed migration patterns, paths that dragons had taken across the galaxy over thousands of years. Kelthara taught me something interesting about dragon travel. You don't go places randomly. You follow currents of cosmic energy, patterns of gravity and magnetism that are invisible to most species. You're not just flying through space. You're reading it, interpreting it, following paths that reveal the deep structure of the universe itself. The young dragon's attention sharpened. This was clearly something important to them. Humans do the same thing, but with different patterns. We read social currents, political structures, economic flows. We follow paths of cooperation and conflict that reveal the deep structure of civilization itself. Marcus highlighted specific routes on his charts. These are the paths dragons use to navigate between galaxies, and these, he overlaid different data, are the trade routes humans use to move resources between colonies. Look at how they intersect. The patterns were beautiful. Dragon migration routes and human trade paths wove together like a complex dance, each following different principles but creating a unified structure. We're both navigators, Marcus said. We just read different kinds of maps. Kelthara's approval was warm in his mind. This is what Marcus, who speaks truth, showed me first. That intelligence takes many forms, but all intelligence seeks patterns. All intelligence tries to make sense of complexity. The Silver Dragon sent a rapid series of harmonics. Marcus was getting better at understanding dragon communication, but this was too fast and complex for him to follow completely. Kelthara translated. Young Silthane asks whether humans would be interested in learning to read cosmic currents in exchange for teaching dragons to read civilization patterns. Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment. The dragon was proposing trade, cultural exchange, the kind of relationship that could change both species forever. "I can't answer for all of humanity," he said slowly. "I'm just a maintenance engineer, but I think there would be a lot of humans very interested in that kind of exchange." "You could ask them." Marcus looked back toward the barrier, where he knew Commander Chen and her staff were monitoring every word of this conversation. "I think I might not have to ask. I think they're already listening." As if summoned by his words, Commander Chen's voice came through his communicator. "Mr. Webb, this is Command. Please confirm that you just received an offer of knowledge exchange from the dragons." "Confirmed, Commander. Though I think it's more of a question than an offer. They want to know if we'd be interested." A long pause. Then, "Mr. Webb, you are now officially promoted to Special Liaison for Dragon Relations. Please inform our new friends that humanity is very interested in mutual knowledge exchange." The young dragon's excitement was visible as waves of color that rippled across their scales, but Kelthara's response was more measured. "There are protocols for such exchanges, ancient agreements among the star-traveling peoples. Humans would need to prove they are ready for such knowledge." "What kind of proof?" Marcus asked. "They would need to demonstrate that they can think beyond their own immediate needs, that they can consider the long-term consequences of their actions, that they can be trusted with knowledge that could reshape worlds." Marcus thought about the barrier network. 17,000 generators maintained by hundreds of engineers for 30 years, protecting millions of people. A project that required unprecedented cooperation, long-term planning, and absolute reliability. "Commander," he said into his communicator, "I think we may have already provided that proof." As the dragons arranged themselves for the journey back to wherever they came from, Marcus realized that humanity was about to step out of its barriers in more ways than one. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of intelligent beings willing to share those wonders with species brave enough to reach for them, even species small enough to be overlooked, if they were clever enough to make themselves impossible to ignore. 6 months after first contact between Marcus Webb and the young dragons, the universe looked very different from the observation deck of Orbital Defense Command. Commander Sarah Chen watched ships moving through space in patterns that would have been impossible before. Human vessels followed graceful arcs that seemed to bend space-time itself, while massive dragon forms glided alongside them in perfect formation. The barriers were still there, but they had become something new. Not walls to keep the universe out, but gateways to let humanity through. The generator network that had once projected pure defensive energy now created corridors of safe passage, protected channels that allowed human ships to travel alongside dragon migration routes without interference from the cosmic storms that made deep space so dangerous for most species. "Daily report, Commander," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, approaching her station with a tablet full of updates. "The New Horizon expedition has successfully reached the Andromeda relay point using the Dragon current maps. They're reporting energy efficiency improvements of 300% over conventional hyperdrive." Sarah nodded, but her attention was on the view outside. Today marked 6 months since Marcus Webb had been officially appointed as humanity's first Dragon Relations Specialist. 6 months since everything changed. The change hadn't been immediate. First, there had been months of careful negotiations, not just with the dragons, but within human space itself. Many colonies had been terrified of lowering the barriers, even partially. The fear of 30 years doesn't disappear overnight. But Marcus had been patient. Every day he met with Kelthara and the young dragons at the barrier perimeter. Every day they shared a little more knowledge. Dragons learned about human engineering precision. Humans learned about cosmic navigation. Slowly, trust grew. The breakthrough had come when Marcus realized that dragons weren't just ancient and powerful. They were lonely. "Rodriguez," Sarah said, "bring up the xenological profile on dragon social structures." The lieutenant worked at his console, and soon the main display showed Dr. Elizabeth Kane's research findings. Dr. Kane was a xenosociologist who had spent the last 6 months studying dragon behavior patterns based on Marcus's conversations. According to Dr. Kane's analysis, Sarah read aloud, dragons are essentially immortal beings who have evolved past the need for traditional social structures. They travel alone, think alone, make decisions alone. They've become so powerful individually that they've forgotten how to be part of something larger than themselves. Rodriguez looked confused. "So, why do they want to learn from us?" Sarah smiled. "Because we're showing them something they lost thousands of years ago. We're showing them how to connect." Through the viewing port, Sarah could see today's gathering forming. Kelthara was there, as always, her blue scales catching starlight like captured ocean waves. But she wasn't alone. The young dragons had returned, and they had brought others. Silver Silthane was there, along with the copper-scaled one Marcus called Brennus. But today there were new dragons, too, older ones, with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light. "Commander," Communications Officer Williams called out, "Marcus is requesting permission to leave the barriers. He says he has something special planned for today's session." Sarah had stopped worrying about Marcus leaving the barriers months ago. The man had proven that sometimes the best way to stay safe was to stop acting afraid. "Permission granted. And Williams, tell him we've got something special too." As Marcus's pod left the barrier perimeter, Sarah watched the dragons arrange themselves in their usual learning circle. But today, something was different. Today, there was another ship approaching from the opposite direction. The ship was massive by human standards, nearly a kilometer long, but still tiny compared to the dragons surrounding it. It was the UES Discovery, humanity's newest and most advanced vessel, and it was carrying something unprecedented. "Commander Chen," a new voice came over the communication system. This was Captain Martinez of the Discovery. "We are in position and ready for the demonstration." Sarah opened a channel to Marcus. "Mr. Webb, you're not the only one who's been learning from our dragon friends. Would you like to show them what humans have been building?" Marcus's laugh carried clearly over the comm. "I was wondering when you were going to reveal that project. Kelthara, are you ready to see what happens when humans really commit to cooperation?" The ancient dragon's response filled the communication array with harmonics of curiosity. "We are prepared to observe Marcus who speaks truth." Sarah gave the signal, and Captain Martinez began the demonstration. The Discovery's cargo bay opened, and something extraordinary emerged. Not one ship, but hundreds. Tiny vessels, each no larger than Marcus's maintenance pod, but moving with perfect coordination. They spread out into a complex three-dimensional pattern, each ship taking its position with mathematical precision. "What you're seeing," Marcus explained to the dragons, "is the logical conclusion of human networking technology. We call it a distributed intelligence matrix. Each of those ships contains an AI unit that's moderately intelligent on its own. But when they work together..." The small ships began to move in unison, their formation shifting and flowing like a living thing. They formed geometric shapes that folded through impossible angles, demonstrating mathematical concepts that would take conventional computers days to calculate. But that wasn't the impressive part. Each AI is learning from all the others in real time, Marcus continued. They share memory, processing power, decision-making algorithms. They've become a collective intelligence that's smarter than the sum of its parts. The formation of ships suddenly broke apart, each vessel heading in a different direction. For a moment, it looked like chaos. Then the pattern became clear. They were mapping the local space around the dragons, using sensors and scanning techniques that adjusted and adapted based on what each ship learned from the others. In 30 seconds, Marcus said, those ships have created a more detailed map of this space than our biggest observatory stations could make in a week. Not because each ship is particularly advanced, but because they're all working together. The ships reconvened into their formation, and the collective data they had gathered appeared as a holographic display visible to everyone present. It showed not just the physical layout of local space, but energy patterns, gravitational fields, cosmic radiation levels, and something else entirely. "Commander," Dr. Kane's voice came over the comm from her research station. "The AI collective is detecting dragon communication patterns in the cosmic background radiation. They're finding traces of dragon conversations that happened weeks ago embedded in the quantum structure of local space." The response from the dragons was immediate and profound. Waves of astonishment rippled through their formation, their scales shifting to colors Sarah had never seen before. "How?" Kelthara's mental voice was filled with wonder. "Dragon speech leaves no traces that endure." "Actually, it does," Dr. Kane replied. "Your communication method involves subtle manipulations of quantum fields. Those manipulations leave signature patterns in space-time that persist for approximately 30 standard days before quantum decay makes them unreadable." Marcus's excitement was audible in his voice. "Kelthara, do you understand what this means? Humans have accidentally built technology that can read dragon history directly from space itself. We can see where you've been, what you've discussed, how you've traveled. This should not be possible for young species." "It's not possible for individual humans," Sarah interjected, opening her own communication channel. "But it's possible for networked humans. When we work together, when we share knowledge and processing power and different perspectives, we can accomplish things that should be beyond us." The AI collective had continued its work while they talked, and now it projected something new into space, a map of dragon migration routes, but not just recent ones. Routes going back months, constructed by reading the quantum traces of ancient conversations and navigation decisions embedded in the fabric of space. "My God!" Captain Martinez breathed over the comm. "The AI network isn't just reading current dragon communications. It's reconstructing dragon history. Look at this pattern." The display showed dragon routes stretching back through time, revealing a picture that no human had ever seen before. Dragons didn't just travel randomly through the galaxy. They were following a vast, ancient pattern, a migration cycle that took thousands of years to complete. "You're not just exploring," Sarah realized. "You're gardening. You're tending the galaxy, making sure that cosmic forces stay in balance, that young civilizations have the space and resources they need to develop. How did small beings discover the great work?" Marcus's voice was soft with awe. "Because we built something capable of seeing patterns larger than any individual human could perceive. We created a collective intelligence that could think on your scale." There was a long silence as the dragons processed this information. Then Silthane, the young silver dragon, sent a pulse that the AI collective translated immediately. "She asks whether humans would be willing to join the great work." The translation appeared on everyone's displays. "She says young civilizations usually develop for thousands of years before they're capable of thinking on galactic scales. But humans have achieved collective intelligence in less than a century." Sarah felt her breath catch. Join the great work. Help tend and protect the galaxy itself. What would that involve? She asked. Kelthera's response carried the weight of eons. It would mean leaving your barriers permanently. It would mean accepting responsibility for civilizations across hundreds of galaxies. It would mean working on projects that will not be completed for millions of years. It would mean, Marcus added quietly, becoming something larger than just human. Sarah looked at the AI collective still mapping dragon history in space, at the mixed fleet of human ships and dragon forms, at the barriers that had once seemed like humanity's only hope for survival. The barriers, she said. What happens to them? They become something new, Kelthera replied. Seed points, bases from which human collective intelligence can coordinate galactic projects. Your networking technology, combined with dragon knowledge of cosmic patterns, could create communication networks spanning entire galactic clusters. Captain Martinez spoke up from the Discovery. Commander, the AI collective is indicating that it's ready to interface with dragon consciousness directly. It wants to attempt a direct knowledge exchange with Kelthera. This was the moment Sarah had been both hoping for and dreading. Direct interface between human AI and dragon intelligence. If it worked, it could revolutionize both species. If it failed, do it, she ordered. The AI collective contracted into a tight sphere, and Kelthera moved closer. When the dragon's consciousness touched the networked human intelligence, the result was visible across the entire star system. Light. Pure, brilliant light that somehow conveyed meaning directly to every mind present. Not words, but concepts. Not thoughts, but understanding. Sarah saw the galaxy as dragons saw it, vast currents of energy and matter flowing in patterns too large for any single mind to grasp. She saw young civilizations struggling to survive while ancient forces shaped the universe around them. She saw the delicate balance that kept chaos from consuming everything, and she saw humanity's place in it all. Not as junior partners or students, but as something new, a species that had learned to think collectively while still maintaining individual creativity. A people who could coordinate on galactic scales while still caring about individual lives. When the connection ended, Sarah found herself looking at a future she had never imagined. Human ships working alongside dragons to guide cosmic forces. Barrier networks expanded into galactic communication grids, AI collectives that could think on scales of millions of years while still responding to immediate needs. Commander, Williams said, his voice filled with wonder, I'm receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They're formally inviting humanity to join as a full member species. Sarah smiled. The dragons waited for one human every day, not because they were curious about barriers, but because they had seen something in humanity that the universe needed, the ability to remain small and caring while thinking vast thoughts, the ability to cooperate without losing individual identity, the ability to build something greater than the sum of its parts. Send our acceptance, Sarah ordered, and prepare for the barriers to come down, all of them. As the dragons and human ships began to arrange themselves for departure toward the galactic core, Sarah realized that the barriers had served their purpose. They had given humanity time to develop not into something that could survive alongside dragons, but into something that could work with them as equals. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of wonders, but it was also full of intelligence working to protect and nurture the growth of new civilizations. And now, humanity was part of that intelligence. Marcus Webb's voice came over the comm one last time. Commander, Kelthera says the great work has been waiting a long time for a species like ours. A species that builds barriers not to hide from the universe, but to make sure they're strong enough to help improve it. Sarah watched the mixed fleet disappear into the cosmic currents that dragons use to navigate between galaxies. Tomorrow, those same currents would carry human ships to distant worlds where other young civilizations were struggling to find their place in the cosmos. The barriers were coming down, but humanity was going up.